All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Local Government Insights podcast, Modernizing Government Leadership, your source and insight for local government technology. My name is Brendan Middleton, and today we're going to be speaking with Avenu's Chief Customer Officer about how local governments today have an opportunity to build trust with constituents by considering a digital strategy. Hi, Lou. Thanks for being here. It's great to have you on the show.
Hey, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
So for all of our listeners, Lou, as I mentioned, is the Chief Customer Officer at Avenu Insights and Analytics. Super excited to have him on today. Quick overview. For the past 20 years, Lou is focused on serving state and local governments nationwide, leading the sales, development, and delivery of a diverse set of innovative solutions. His proven expertise in company leadership, maintaining executive client relationships, developing and growing new business solutions, and managing operational excellence. Today, Lou leads an organization that is responsible for serving over 3,000 state and local governments nationwide, ensuring effective communication and identifying ways to continue improving operations and maximizing tax revenue across all areas of local government. And I'm super excited to dive into this topic about building trust through digital services. So, Lou, before we get started, would you tell us a little bit and tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and maybe touch on your experience in the industry?
Well, unfortunately, it's more than 20 years, but I won't tell you how long it's been. But, um, I've been lucky enough in my career. I started with a company called Digital Equipment Corporation and then moved to other companies like HP and Compaq and Xerox. And, I've been lucky enough to work for companies that were very value oriented. And so being here at Avenue, it's kind of a natural progression for me. Smaller company, but still the same set of values, both from an employee standpoint and a customer standpoint. I personally think I have one of the best jobs in the company.
Wow.
My responsibility is customers, talking to customers on a regular basis and making sure that they're happy with our products and services. I don't know how much better it can get than that. So.
Awesome. So Lou, one of my first questions for you today is really around the challenge that governments really of all sizes have when connecting and building trust within their communities. A recent poll by Gallup stated that over 3/4, 75% of Americans actually trust their local government, while less than half trust the federal government. So we're going to talk about ways that governments are instilling this trust that they seem to already have, a vast majority of their constituents, on trusting them. But how can digital strategies and digital transformation continue to build that number? So in our digital world, American citizens, you and I, we're used to easy, quick, and convenient digital services that the private sector readily offers. A lot of times local governments and governments of all sizes kind of lag behind that. So constituents actually expect that same efficiency and quality of service from their government. When the public sector doesn't deliver, citizens wonder why and start to question whether their government has their best interest at heart. So one of my first questions is, how can governments begin to instill trust in their communities by really taking a look at their digital strategies and implementing digital transformation?
Well, I think the first thing I'd speak to is the difference between local and federal government. And I don't think that's anything more than an efficacy issue. I live in a small town. I live in Savannah, Georgia, 150,000 people. And here, I see and interact with elected officials all the time, whether it's at a movie or on a line going somewhere or a concert. I mean, these people are here readily available to have conversations with and communicate with, and that kind of creates the basis for a trusted relationship. I mean, if you're in a larger town, obviously that's not easy, but
Sure.
For the most part, local governments are easier to create a relationship that's trusted between elected officials and constituents. Um, Other than that, I think it's a matter of transparency and communication. So the more municipality can do electronically, the better they can serve the constituents. The more they communicate to the constituents around what they're trying to do, how they're trying to improve services, the better off they'll be. I think the issue becomes especially after a year like 2020, is allocating funds to make improvements in their technology. Most of the government agencies I speak to, there's a lot of things that money gets allocated to that are critical, public safety being one of them. And it's tough to carve out money to create better environments from a technology standpoint. And it's not always a simple or inexpensive solution that needs to be put in place, because many of these places have little to no technology. And so it's a heavy lift to get them where they need to be, or they're on legacy technology, and making that transition both from a technology standpoint and a training standpoint, that organizational transformation, maybe a new business process becomes a problem. So, I mean, what I think customers should do is consider solutions that create revenue streams. There are a lot of solutions out there. I mean, we provide a few, but there are a lot of solutions out there that could actually create a new revenue stream for a municipality, so that they can take that revenue that maybe wasn't considered in the budget and direct it to some of these improvements that they need. Opportunities to roll from an old technology to a new technology without a significant hit to capital expense, maybe by moving the operating expense up a little bit, 10-15% over time, and spreading the payments out, helps them move easily from old technology to new technology, and a lot of companies are willing to do that. And then the last thing is really to take a look at lower cost platforms. We provide some, a lot of companies do, things like hosted or shared solutions. In a lot of places where there are smaller municipalities, like small counties in one particular region, one of the things we're working with our customers on is maybe sharing a single implementation of an application where it may not be as highly customized as you would like. It does everything it needs to do to get their business done, but it doesn't come with a heavy price tag or any one of the municipalities actually picking up the full tab. So those are some of the ideas I think governments could take a look at.
Yeah, and when we start talking about upgrading technology, we all know that governments rely on manual processing, specific to paper processing. And I'd like to touch on that just a minute, Lou. We know that, some of the biggest hurdles and most enduring stumbling blocks to efficient and convenient government is over-reliance on paper. And there's a lot of processes still today that are 100% manual and processed, paper processing through and through. So can you discuss some of the challenges many governments face with that reliance on paper-driven processes, and how that affects citizen engagement as it pertains to building trust?
Sure. So the first part of that problem is abundance, right? So a lot of these cities, counties, have tons and tons of paper. I actually know a customer who I met with last year who reluctantly admitted to me that they have 18 barges worth of paper records in their harbor because they didn't have space anymore on land. So, wow. Just the sheer numbers of records and data books and handwritten notes and those kinds of things, deeds, takes up a lot of space, and it's not easy to actually manipulate in an efficient way. So that's the first problem, the amount of work that has to be done to kind of move from paper to electronic records, which, there's a lot of companies that do that. And a lot of these municipalities actually use grants, grant money or subsidies where they can take that money and direct it to, creating electronic records over time. Well, they'll take a 10-year period of time and they'll digitize those records. And then, every chance they get to spend money or something comes in that they didn't expect, like a grant, they could direct it to doing that. So it's something that you have to be dedicated to, and expect that it's going to take time to get all that paper over to digital records. The second issue is the reliance that's been built or has been conditioned by having people show up either by necessity or habit to a facility to do something. There are ways that you can make a transaction easier for people and allow them the opportunity to adopt it. I mean, I think about whoever wants to go to a DMV again. Right? I know
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
right? Um, as far as helping, digital services building trust, the first time, just sticking with the DMV scenario, the first time I renewed my registration or license online, there was a little trepidation that, something may go wrong, that I'm not going to get my documentation on time, that I'm going to get stopped by a cop and I'm going to say, but no, I processed it. I didn't get it back in the mail. A hundred things could have gone wrong. But when I received my license in a few days, I became a happy customer that trusted the results. So I think the more you have customers do it, the easier it is for them to do. And the more you show that it's a reliable way to operate, the better everybody will be, and the trust will be built just based on that.
Excellent. And instilling that reliability, and over time, trust will continue to grow as your constituents don't feel the need to come down to the courthouse, don't feel the need to have to come down to print a record. They can access it right there online in the comfort of their own home. And then it being accurate and it going through efficiently, they're happy that they live in that jurisdiction that provides that solution. Therefore, they trust their government officials with their tax dollars. And that's where I want to go next, Lou, is tax revenue. I'd like to take a few minutes just to discuss another main area that constituents interact with their local government, and that's through tax revenue collection. Basically the sole source of revenue for many jurisdictions. We all know that taxes are, notoriously complex and difficult for ordinary citizens, whether it be John Q. Public or whether it be a business owner. You mentioned in one of our pre-show conversations that local governments can certainly make their own revenue collection processes more efficient by digitizing and automating them. I'd like to talk about just a few ways that governments should consider improving their tax collection process through various digital offerings.
Yeah, so it's not just taxes. I mean, there's fines, there's fees, there's permitting and licensing. There's 100 different ways that a citizen would react with the government in terms of revenues, right? And I think you got to start at the beginning. So when you talk about, let's use property tax for example, something that we do here. You start with the actual assessor going out and creating the basis for the tax, right? So you make that transaction easier and more transparent. If somebody's going to come to my house and say, well, this house is worth X, I'd like to understand what they looked at. I'd like to understand what that process was. Putting that on a digital platform makes it easier for anybody to take a look at, access it, and it absolutely makes it easier for the assessor to do their work in a very transparent and consistent way, right? And that creates the basis for the taxes. In terms of providing taxes or the ability to, look at them and understand what taxes are coming at you and how to file, being online is a lot easier than doing it in an office, having to go to a facility and speak to somebody, wait online to, speak to somebody about how you fill out forms, sitting there with the paper. I mean, maybe I'm the only person that makes mistakes when they fill out a form, but I do it all the time. So,
Right.
being able to just kind of backspace and fix what I did wrong is kind of a good thing. So, the tax part, any kind of fees and collections is better online because of the ease of doing it. I don't have to go to a facility. I don't have to go to a municipal building, and I don't have to deal with paper, which to me is probably the best of all worlds.
Wonderful. Well, Lou, you've mentioned communication. Communication was really ultimately at the root of all of your feedback so far, whether it be a tax or fee collection process or digitizing a paper-driven manual process. Communication really is, ultimately at the root of building trust, is what I'm hearing. What are ways that you see governments can improve these communications with constituents that ultimately will improve trust? And we all know there's platforms, there's tons of different types of ways that governments or entities can communicate uh, directly with constituents or whoever they're trying to communicate. You've got platforms like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. You've got all these platforms. Like, what are ways that governments can improve those communications and consistently communicate how they're improving their operations with their communities?
Well, I think the issue that they face is the consistency of that communication, right?
Yeah.
And starting with the platform. So if I have to go to Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook or whatever else I have to go to, the government website, um, that's confusing enough. It's like, which way do I go for what? I
Hmm.
think most governments have kind of adopted the portal strategy where they put their services up on portals.
Yep.
I know some governments that have that front end portal that you can get to, so it's a single front end. But then when you go to do one thing versus another, I go to get a permit versus I'm paying my taxes, you kind of switched off to a completely different application where it's not consistent, it's not clear, it's not concise. Having done permitting doesn't necessarily make it easier for me to understand how to do my taxes, right? Because the applications are different. So I think what we have to get to is the point where governments have that portal. There's a single place to go to access all these applications. But more importantly, the applications have to be consistent in the way they interact with an individual. And that takes time. That takes a lot of work
Yeah.
with a vendor like us to put the applications in place that have that similar look and feel, have the same way to access help, have the same way to cashier something out. So it's the consistency of that communication and that interaction. It needs to be clear, it needs to be concise, and it needs to be consolidated and user friendly. I mean, those are tall orders for most smaller municipalities anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think with the technology that's provided today by vendors like us, I think it's becoming more accessible for all municipalities to be able to put something in place that's a single platform that represents how they want to do business with their constituents.
And to build on that, I would think that the timeliness of that interaction with the constituent would be a byproduct of the consolidation and the consistency of the portals and the applications, having them in one ecosystem, so to speak, is what you're alluding to. The timeliness of how they're pushing out communication and how they're receiving that communication back from the constituents, and that response rate, improving that response rate, and how to address issues as soon as they come up, but also get immediate near term you know, topics of communication out consistently and timely would be a byproduct of that consolidation, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that we do when we think about products and services is if you look at any municipality, you kind of have to follow the paper or
Yeah.
hopefully the digital record, right? How it gets around the municipality and being able to have it electronic and have it in a consistent format with platforms that speak to each other in similar ways, a single database structure, a single UI, just makes it easier, not just for constituents, but for the governments to actually operate it. And it allows the paper or digital record, the information to actually flow through a municipality in a way that makes everything more efficient, makes it less costly to operate. You don't have to staff counters for people to come in and process things. It's just, the benefits to it are kind of endless. Again, it takes a little time. It takes a little upfront effort to get, a city or a county to that point.
Right.
But I think, that's the way we look at it is how does the service we provide interact or connect to all the other services that county has to perform? How does a justice system interact with a government record system? And how
Right.
does a public safety record interact with a justice system? That's the important thing to think about when you're looking at putting technology in a municipality.
And there's got to be overlap there too. Whenever you're talking about integrating multiple systems, there's probably overlap in terms of costs and implementation time. So that's powerful, Lou. So thank you for that. I know I'm going to round us out today by just talking about some key takeaways. I know I've learned a lot today. Would you just take us home by just talking through just some of the key takeaways you would leave some of our listeners and other government leaders who are looking for ways to ultimately not only improve operations, but as they improve operations internally, how do they continue to build and instill trust within their communities?
So when we look at products, we look at roadmaps, right? We take whatever it is we're doing, property tax, for example, and we say, what does it look like today? What is it going to look like 6 months from now? What's it going to look like
Right.
3 years from now, right? And it's a great part of the process. The takeaway that I would like anybody to think about is what does that look like in that particular locale? So whether it's a city or a county, or even a business, what does it look like now? What would you like it to look like short term? And then what do you want it to be long term? And the one thing that customers should not do is do that in a vacuum. One of the things that I try to do as much as I can when I speak to customers is to have that conversation. What are you thinking about? How do you look at the services you want to provide? What would your optimal service be? How would you like to, be perceived by your constituents? And then build kind of a roadmap. And whether it includes our services or somebody else's services really doesn't matter. It's just important that they have that roadmap and they think about where they are now, where they want to get to, and then bring in resources. There's a lot of free consulting out there, just in talking to vendors
Yeah.
and solution providers who all have a different opinion and a different approach.
Yeah.
But when you start thinking about it, you can pick and choose as a customer to figure out what's my best path forward. And that to me is probably whether it's digitizing, whether it's a portal, whether it's different apps or consistent platforms. All that needs to be considered. But having the conversation, drawing a map to say, here I am now, here's where I want to be, and then getting a lot of feedback, free feedback for the most part, to how to get there is probably the most important thing that a customer can do.
Incredible. Well, Lou, I love hearing your perspective on this topic. We all know that running an effective organization, whether it's a government organization or a private company, effective communication, instilling trust within your internal and external teams, and also having efficiently run operations is really at the root of being a successful organization. So this has been awesome. I've had a lot of takeaways from this conversation. I can't thank you enough for doing this. For all of our listeners,
Pleasure.
thank you for joining us on another episode of the Local Government Insights podcast. Please stay tuned for more local government news and insights to come. We look forward to having you all join us next time. Thanks, Lou.
Thanks, Brandon.